Today, we're looking at a green ink by Sailor, Dandyism. It's an ism, so it depends on how you feel about isms. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. Down below there's timestamps so that if there's only certain things you're interested, you can skip around to it. But if you've got the time, I would appreciate you checking out the entire video. You can also follow me over on Instagram. And if you like fountain pen ink reviews and are new here, I would invite you to subscribe. To make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples, then put the ink into this Tasha Spectrum with a music nib, wrote with it for a day, and used it to take the notes for this video. This first writing sample is done on Clairfontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. Additional papers will show up later. Now, let's look at the writing sample. I picked this ink up in sample form, and they come in vials like this. And to make sure I keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Let's take a look at the Clairfontaine. We get no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo sheen, and no shade. Now the extra fine is a little bit darker, ever so slightly, than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, but it does offer quite a bit of shading throughout, even though it's a little bit darker. Like the K in Quick is quite a bit darker. The T in The is a bit lighter. The X in Fox is a bit darker. So it does offer it throughout. It's just that it's a much darker ink to use. 9 seconds to dry. Medium is about the same tone as the extra fine with no feather spread, halo sheen. I didn't get any shading here. 18 seconds to dry. The scrubby of the extra fine shows a slight bit of color variation far left to far right. We do get some of that up there. The medium shows none, and we got none. Tomoe River. No bleeding and normal Tomoe River ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade, but the color coming through here is much nicer than we saw in the Clairfontaine. The extra fine is slightly darker than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, and no shade. 14 seconds to dry. Medium is darker even than the extra fine with no feather spread, halo sheen, and no shade. 30 seconds to dry. Scrubby for both show no color variation, and we didn't get any. And then Rhodia. No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, and no shade. The extra fine is slightly darker than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, or shade. 10 seconds to dry. Medium is quite a bit darker than the extra fine with no feather spread, halo sheen, and no shade. 19 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both shows no real color variation. We didn't expect it, and we didn't get it. I agree with Vita that I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down and immediately put it into water for 10 to 15 seconds. And we see that this is a darker green that can be lighter. You see a line across the bottom where it started immediately getting into the filter paper. It's pushing up nice and light and getting darker as the ink's collecting towards the top. But we do see this bright yellow just shining through the top of the chromatography. The one on the right I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into water. And the most notable difference is the amount of green that stayed in place, forming a line at the bottom of this chromatography, which does make you feel like it's going to have some permanence to it. Resistance tests are done to see how well this ink can be expected to perform on the page and how hard it may be to clean from your pen. I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, this handles it very well. This is a very safe ink to use in a note-taking situation because it didn't budge. Water had very little, I would call it no effect. You can't even really see where the water was put down. Pen flush had very little effect. It really only started to break down the tiniest bit of the ink across the top. Now 1/3 bleach solution is breaking it up. Now that's only 30 seconds that it was sitting on the page. And should you need to use the 1/3 bleach solution to get this out of your pen, just make sure that you wash your pen with water immediately after so you don't rust those metal bits. But I think you need something a little bit stronger here. You may need to be using that 1/3 bleach. I test ink viscosity or flow by using a tilt test, and I've linked that video and put that in here for you. Now for the inks I've tested, I have found an average viscosity of 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Sailor's Dandyism has a viscosity of 1.42, making this a pretty wet ink. To find my average dry times, I use my writing samples. Now for the inks I've tested, I found an average dry time of 17 seconds, with the realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Sailor's Dandyism has an average dry time of 17 seconds, making it not just normal, but average. And that's average from being a very, very wet ink. Instead of finding inks that look like Sailor's Dandyism, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. Now, I wanted a lighter purple, and I went with Diamine Grape. The second writing sample is done on limon and black and red paper. Here we're looking at limon paper. Now, it's not really, I don't know this as a great fountain pen friendly paper. I have found a number of inks that do well with it. This is not one of them. There's a lot of bleed through, a lot of ghosting. You couldn't use the back of the page, but it did not touch the page underneath. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, and no shade. I take that back because there's a little feathering going on in the M, but nowhere else. This makes me wonder if maybe I was touching the paper before it had been written there. You know, I touch it just like that. The extra fine is a little bit darker than the stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen, and no shade, 6 seconds to dry. Now the medium is quite a bit darker than the extra fine. It has no, well, it has feathering, tiny feathering, all over it. On the R of over, the K of quick, the Q of quick, the whole word the. So there is quite a bit of feathering that does go on here with the medium. It doesn't stop you from using it. I see this more as having an issue of the paper than this ink. This is a lower produced paper. It has no spread, halo, sheen, no shade, 12 seconds to dry. Yeah, a lot of feathering on this with the medium. The scrubby for both show us no color variation, and we didn't get any color variation. Black and red notebooks. No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, or shade. The extra fine is about the same tone as the stub. It has no feather spread, halo sheen. It does offer spots of shading. The K in quick is darker. The B in brown is darker. The word the is noticeably darker than the word over. 5 seconds to dry. Now the medium is darker than the extra fine. It has no feather spread, halo sheen, and no shade, 11 seconds to dry. The scrubby of the extra fine, far left to far right, does show a tiny bit of color variation, and we do get spots of it. The medium shows none, and we had none, and that is all that I have for the writing sample. So what do I think of Sailor's Dandyism? There's no standout qualities about this ink that are going to draw you to it over a different green. Its shading is not especially something that you go to this ink for. The tone, though, draws to me in a way and makes me want to use it more frequently, that when the time comes for a green ink, this might be on my list for a bottle. It's a very nice ink to use, but I don't know that you can go wrong with too many Sailor inks. So what nib and pen will give the best writing experience with this ink? I think a dry fine really puts the perfect amount of ink down to make this green be its own distinct green that looks gorgeous. Again, you're not going to get the shading, only an amazing green tone. I do new ink reviews every single day, so if you're new here, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Thanks for watching.